Hello, everybody, and welcome back to episode 7 of the MMA Archive. I'm excited, man. I couldn't believe, honestly, how impressed I was coming away from this event. There's a lot to talk about, so let's get right into it. UFC number 7, the Brawl in Buffalo. This one takes place, obviously, in Buffalo, New York, at the Memorial Auditorium. 9,000 people were there in attendance on this very day, September 8th, 1995. So we're inching our way once again, inching our way. Before we know it, we're going to have a couple of other organizations in the fold here, but this one is nothing to sneeze at, man. Our featured bout of the night, Ken Shamrock versus Oleg Taktarov. We have the winner of the featured bout in UFC 6 going up against the winner of the tournament from UFC 6. Fire. Just great matchmaking. Interesting clash of styles, too. So I'm interested to talk to you guys about how that one played out. And then some awesome entrance into this tournament. We got a lot of repeating familiar faces that were in previous tournaments, as well as some brand newcomers, which are going to shock you guys for real. Like I said, I came away extremely impressed and can't wait to talk about it. So, as always, our TV announcers, we got a little switch up this time. We got Bruce Beck, Jeff Blatnick, but then we also have Don the Dragon Wilson, who's also a kickboxer, which I found very interesting, sort of added to that dynamic before. Obviously, these guys are grapplers as far as Blatnick. So having a striker on commentary too really helps to sort of, I guess you could see where the striking is at this point compared to where we think it is when you have a professional kickboxer there critiquing. Definitely helps open your eyes a little bit to what's really going on as far as the technique. But obviously, effective striking in MMA is different than effective striking in kickboxing. So can't really compare the two. But as far as striking and striking goes, it's good to have that voice of reason there on the broadcast. Of course, ring announcer Michael Buffer making his second appearance straight. Always kind of weird to see this Bruce Buffer, this Buffer brother. I mean, instead of Bruce, Michael Buffer doing his thing. So used to see him in boxing, but you love to see it, obviously. So this one, I'm not gonna lie, we got a couple of sad notes. So the first one being the first three fights of the night, the alternate bouts. Obviously, these would determine who would step in if there was an injury or anything like that. I love to watch these, but unfortunately, I could not find tape on either of them, which pisses me off. They show the recap in the beginning of the broadcast, but they didn't show any highlights. So I couldn't even see highlights and talk about those, which sucks. But here's the winners, if you guys care about that. In the first one, we had Joel Sutton versus Giza Kalman. Sutton wins via cut stoppage at 46 seconds. Next up, we had Onassis Parangao. I believe he's from the Philippines, versus Francesco Maturi. Onassis Parangao wins via submission to strikes at 5 minutes, 26 seconds. So that was a little bit of a longer one. And then we have Scott Besack versus David Hood. Scott Basak wins via guillotine at 31 seconds. So just like that, now we're into the fights that I got to see. The tournament bouts, we're starting there. First fight that we got is big Jerry Harris versus the Polar Bear Varelans. Obviously, Paul Varelans is returning after losing in UFC 6 to Tank Abbott, who ended up going on to the finals. So interested to see how far he could get in this one. Obviously, representing trap fighting, standing at 6'8", 300 pounds. The beast. Once again, rest in peace, Paul Varelans, who unfortunately passed away due to COVID. He was facing off against Gary Harris, representing Kyokushin Karate. He's 6'8", 260 pounds. It was also a former Milwaukee Brewers security guard, which is important to note. You got to love those little anecdotes that they have. But this one started off with a banger. They both ran immediately after one another. Paul Varelans was able to duck right into a knee to the body, um, which obviously is not what you want. Jerry landed a nice knee, lunging in, but Paul actually grabbed him right by that knee and pushed him to the fence. The nice little single leg takedown entry, eventually getting him down to the ground. Varelans worked his way into side control, landed some nice short shots on the ground, and eventually just went straight to the back, which I found interesting. The fact that he was able to um, get Jerry to turn over and flatten out. And this I found pretty funny, but this reminded me a lot of the Nate Diaz Conor McGregor fight, but for completely random reason. The first one, that is, when Nate Diaz locked up the choke, he had one arm already underneath the chin, but it wasn't all the way in the bend of the elbow. It was sort of on the forearm, and then he lifted it with that forearm and then just started landing strikes. And Paul Vargas did the same thing. Or tried to. He had the forearm on his neck and was pulling up against Gary Harris and trying to punch to get the proper angle to get the choke. But it wasn't working, man. It wasn't working. It was funny. He tried it on both sides. So he's landing shots with the left, didn't work. Switch hands, still on the forearm, and then trying to throw left hands to get him to fall into the crook of the elbow. I found that so funny. He was trying really hard to get that choke, but couldn't get it on either side. But finally, he just said, fuck it, and threw some downward elbows to the back of the head. And from that position, man, Eddie Bravo talks about that all the time. How if that's legal in the rule set, that's what you should be doing. You shouldn't even be trying to go for a choke. And this one shows you why. As soon as those elbows landed, Jerry tapped and finished it off. So Paul Varelans was able to come away with the win at 1 minute and 7 seconds. And then, most importantly, the big fella capped it off with the front flip. Man, you gotta give your shouts where you get them. I mean, that's crazy. Doing a doing a little front flip after your fight is over. Don't waste too much energy now, But hey, gotta show respect where it's due, and that was a good knockout to start the night for sure. So next up, we had Mark Hall coming up against Harold Howard. Now, I'm sure that's a name you remember. Harold Howard is making his return after losing in the finals at UFC 3, standing at 6'2", 240, with the mullet. You already know. If you're coming, come on then. You already know the vibes. I thought he looked a little slimmed down in this one, which obviously is good to note. But he's fighting Mark Hall, who's representing Taekwondo, standing at 6', 190. Definitely the smaller man, but you could tell he was much more built as far as muscle mass than Harold Howard was. So that was interesting for me to watch. As soon as starting out, obviously it's tough to try to pick the smaller man outright, but I had a sense that there was something in the water with this one. So I got my eye on Mark Hall. And as soon as this one started, it was such a meme, man. Harold Howard comes out standing just straight upright. His chin is just in the air and he's bouncing and he's not even moving his head. He's just bouncing on his feet. So there's a real cadence to his movement, but he's just standing straight upright, begging to be hit, to be honest. And it was funny for a second just how strange that was. Mark Hall wasn't even trying to throw anything at him. He was just looking at him like, what the hell? Like, are we doing this? Is this what we're doing? So that was funny. They had a little face off there for a little bit before any action really started. But finally, Mark Hall landed Harold Howard landed a front kick to the liver that actually did damage to Mark Hall. And you could see Howard was all over him. He opened up with the flurry of uppercuts to the body while they were up against the fence. And Mark Hall does whatever he could to sort of tie up and eventually sort of work his way off the fence. Howard was trying to get a trip takedown, but Mark Hall was able to stuff it. And then I found this so funny, man. At one point, Howard just said, fuck it again and said, I'm going for it, and grabbed him by the neck and was able to get a nice trip takedown by doing that. You never see that just on the feet, just running up to someone and grabbing their neck with both hands. But it worked in this case. He grabbed them, and as soon as he grabbed them, he stopped worrying about his feet, and he was able to get a nice trip takedown from there, and landed straight into mount. Which for a second looked scary, but Mark Hall was able to roll through and end up in top position. So just a hard shift of momentum there for Harold Howard. Everything was looking great until he was able to get the reversal, obviously. And Mark Hall's working from on top, man, landing some good quick shots on the ground. Eventually, you see Harold Howard is sort of leaking from his nose. It was weird because there wasn't really a specific strike that you could point to that was like that was the hard one that landed that opened him up. But there was a lot of blood coming out very quickly, which I was surprised by. It's like it didn't look like any of the shots were that damaging, but it was leaking like a faucet. And eventually, I found this hilarious that I had to note it. Mark Hall was in full guard, just holding Harold Howard's hair, like by the back of his head, just grab it, holding his mullet and looking at him. And I was like, this is such a like strange sexual position you're in right now. My man's just in full guard, just holding his head, looking at him, just holding him by his hair, looking at him. I'm like, this is very strange, but I guess this is effective offense. I've been in that position myself before, and it wasn't it wasn't in a fight, trust. But eventually, Harold Howard actually decided to tap out to strikes, and I found that super fascinating because, like I said, it wasn't many strikes that were landing that you would think was very damaging or particularly hard shots. But you gotta, he obviously felt something in there that made him want out. And you got to respect that. I was just very surprised by this fight in general. I think it was a very probably the most bloody yet most uneventful fight I've ever seen. Like there wasn't really much happening. There wasn't a lot of strikes landing. But it was once they got into that full guard position and Harold Howard started taking shots, it kind of felt like the end. Even before he tapped out, it felt like all the momentum was sapped out of Harold Howard. So that was a very strange one. Just think about Harold Howard's fall, man. He made it to the finals up against Steve Jenham, which was supposed to be before that. He was supposed to fight Hoist Gracie leading into that, and then now he's getting bounced out in the first round of the tournament. Crazy, crazy stuff. But now we got two semifinalists, Mark Hall as well as Paul Varelans. So can't complain. Next up, a third quarterfinal. Oh, let me give you the numbers on that one. So that one ended. Sorry about that. Mark Hall wins via submission to strikes at 1 minute and 41 seconds. So there we go. Next up, we got another returning face, this time from a much earlier time. We have Remco Pardoel making his UFC return after losing to Hoist Gracie at UFC 2, representing judo at 6'4", 265. He looks so different in this fight. Obviously, a couple years have passed at this point. Really cool to see him kind of mature and grow up in that way, and still out there competing. Um, and he was going up against one Ryan Parker, making his UFC debut, representing Kumite, which I found hilarious. The art of Kumite, at 6'2", 235 pounds. This one was a fun one. I'm not gonna lie. So Remco ended up closing the distance well at the beginning of the fight, and ended up in an upper body lock where Ryan Parker sort of holding on and trying to land some cheeky left hooks to the back of Hemko's head. Obviously, that's legal at this point, so it's all fair game. Just landing shots. They ended up there for a couple of, probably I would say a good minute, just sort of stuck in that spot. Ryan Parker's landing shots. Hemko's trying to get the right angle, and eventually you see Hemko shift his hips in good old judo fashion and lands a really nice hip toss straight into scarf hold, which is just beautiful. Obviously that's his bread and butter. Did it twice at UFC 2 in that elongated tournament, and now is off to a strong start here. Um, and I found this beautiful. I'm gonna talk through it. He locked up a really nice straight armbar, which is when you're in scarf hold, which is a variation of side control, but you're more so on the head. And he extends his opponent's arm in between his own legs and starts to bridge upwards. So think about it. Your arms hanging out this way while you're in a headlock, and then he's using his hips to sort of bridge up and torque on that arm. I was really surprised that he ended up not getting the tap from there, just because it looked very, very tight. But Remco said, if that ain't working, then this will. And starts to land some real big right hands from top position. Ryan continues to hit the back of the head whenever he can. Just really, really a testament of like, even if you're in a bad spot, like keep trying to do something. I mean, you could argue that energy could have been used in a better way as far as trying to get up, but he's trying out there. You can't say he's not trying. Eventually, Ryan Parker is able to free his arm, but is still sort of stuck in the scarf hold position. And that's when Remco starts to move right into mount. And you could tell, man, Ryan Parker looks in a bad way. Remco's locked up in mount, and you could see him going for it. And I couldn't believe it. Shout out to Alexei Oleinik. He's going to be fighting soon. But I could not believe it when I saw it, man. We got an old school Ezekiel choke from full mount, which is when it's basically a rear naked choke, but on top. So it's a little hard to explain in that way because one of your arms is under their head, the other is over their arm. But really, really nice job locking it up. And as soon as it was in, Ryan Parker tapped immediately. So I was really surprised by that, getting that torque, getting that kind of pressure. But we see it works. It works in no gi, and hey, Remco comes out with the gi every time. So you got to give him the respect using the gi to get a gi choke. It was listed as a lapel choke, but that's a Ezekiel choke to me, if I could say so myself. So Remco Pardoel wins via Ezekiel choke at 3 minutes 5 seconds. So now our final quarterfinal bout is between the newcomer Marco Huas. He's listed at 6'1", 210 pounds, and representing Muay Thai. His nickname, which I found hilarious, is the King of the Streets. Apparently, he was a Vale Tudo champion in Brazil, Rio de Janeiro to be exact. Shout out to Jose Aldo, still doing his thing in 2021, baby. But Marco Huas back in the day representing for his Brazilian people. Crazy, because if you asked me, and I hope this isn't ignorant, this may sound ignorant, but I gotta say it. It looked like Hoist Gracie bulked up and came back with no gi, like shirtless, just doing his thing. And I found it hilarious because they look alike. That's what I mean by saying that. But the King of the Streets, Huas, claimed to be undefeated in bare knuckle boxing matches, as well as decided to leave out his age. I found that really interesting. He was shy. He didn't want the ladies to know how old he is. But coming out there to do his thing against Larry Thunderfoot Curtin. You guys probably remember that name. He's coming in at 6'2", 238, representing kickboxing and returning after taking a loss to Todd Medina back in UFC number 5. So this is his redemption shot, which I find pretty interesting. It's not like he was in a alternate bout or anything for UFC 6. So I guess he just took a little break and came back in UFC 7 and got the call. So respect. And man, when I kept telling you I was impressed, I'm gonna be honest. I'm just gonna tell you it's with Marco Huas. As soon as this fight started, even just walking around the cage and walking in his stance, Huas looked just so much more fluid than anyone that's ever competed in the UFC at this point. I'm being real. Um, the way he walks in his stance, which is obviously a boxing custom, which is where you're in your orthodox or southpaw stance and you're moving side to side, you're circling about in the cage, in the ring, wherever you are. And just by his movement, I was really stunned just to see how well he moved coming forward and backwards in his stance. Um, and I knew from as soon as they circled out of the little inner cage, I was like, this is going to be a tough one for Larry Curtin, and that's just from movement. So I was really surprised by this one. But they started off, and I found this hilarious. But Marco Huas went straight into a body lock. I thought with the way he was circling, he was going to try to land some shots, but from there, Larry Curtin actually tried to jump guillotine, which I found so funny. This was one of the funniest moments of the night. As he like tried to jump guillotine, so he has the headlock. He tries to jump and pull his legs up. As soon as he jumps off the floor, Huas lifted him up, and Huas was smaller than him by considerable amounts. From that point, I knew that this guy was really strong, grappling wise too, which you don't really see um, even in modern day. Sometimes when a guy is known for being a Muay Thai striker, they don't have the grappling chops, but Marco Huas did, and you could tell because as soon as he jumped Gilly, um, Huas just lifts him up and slams him down into side control, past the legs, so that the guillotine is totally out of range now, and goes to work. Super powerful, but very technical to make that decision to jump into side control from that spot. A little hard to explain visually, but please check that one out because just seeing a bigger man try to jump guillotine and being caught midair like that, like that's very hard to do. Like if someone's throwing their body back to try to hold them up and yourself with that momentum and someone that's bigger than you. That is just once again very impressed by the strength there by Huas. But Huas starts to work his way from half guard into mount in literally seconds. Like he's quick with his transitions on the ground. But Curitan felt it and bridged out and reversed and ended up right in Hua's guard. So I'm licking my chops now. I'm like, okay, now we get to see defensively how he looks too. And it ain't all easy, man. Curtin lands a big right hand on the ground that really gets the commentators going. He has a chance. So Hua starts working for arm triangle from the bottom, Aljamain Sterling style. Aljo was able to finish that against Takeya Mizugaki, which was very surprising. But this is a position that generally you'll see people work for from top position, not from bottom position. So when I saw this, I was freaking out, dude. I'm like, this man's going for an arm triangle, and it's close. Like you see Curtin at many points struggling to breathe. He's grabbing the fence to sort of relieve some pressure and hold his head up so that he has a little more leverage in that choking position. And eventually he started landing some really nice rib roasters, thudding shots to Huas's ribs that forces him to let go of the submission. And from that moment, I'm like, we got to fight. Like this is a fight. This isn't a just one guy who's technically superior, having his way with you. No, that this is a back and forth contest here, regardless of Curitan not having the most dominant positions up until this point. So Huas lets go of the submission, eventually tries to have it to attack for an armbar, and doesn't have it. Curitan's able to get his arm out, and I'm just impressed now by Curitan too, because Obviously, there's not a lot of people that attack for these kind of submissions, especially with this level of speed. And Kuratin's keeping up. He's not getting lost at all. Eventually, he responded to that armbar attack by standing up. He wanted to get out of there, and found himself sort of stuck against the fence as Huas tries to attempt to get an angle for a leg lock. So Kuratin standing with his back to the fence and sort of looking down at Huas, and Huas is on the ground trying to attack his leg, and Huas landed a really nasty up kick, which had me once again just super impressed, man. You don't see that often. There's only been, to my knowledge, that I can remember, two upkick knockouts in UFC history. One of them was on I was about to say the Contender Series, on the Ultimate Fighter by Tony Ferguson, one of my favorite fighters ever, against Justin Lawrence, which is beautiful. And it wasn't even considered a knockout because he knocked him out obviously he was on the ground, through the up kick, knocked out Justin Lawrence, and finished it with ground and pound, obviously from top position. And that's how they ended up calling it off. But he was out before he even hit the ground. So that I consider that up kick knockout. The other one was Nico Price versus James Vick. Nico Price, the king of the comeback, man, just threw it. I didn't expect it at all to land, and landed right on the chin with the heel, which is brutal. Brutal. And ended up getting the finish there with some follow-up shots as well. But this one, Huas landed that nasty up kick. It's legal, obviously, because in some instances today, if you're grounded yourself, you can't throw up kicks because you're considered a grounded fighter. Uh, Same thing. I mean, that would be unfair if you can't kick a grounded fighter, but they could kick you to the head. So you got to be really careful with that. But obviously, Huas not worried about that at all in this rule set. And it lands a nasty up kick that really hurt Kirtan. Like you see after he landed that, he's sort of stopped for a second, looking at Huas and really trying to figure out what he's trying to do. Because he's trying to attack that leg. Eventually he ended up dropping for a heel hook, and outside heel hook, and got it. Dude, what? Like, what? From the movement, Huas didn't even land really a lot of strikes on the feet, but just from the movement, I was super impressed. Um, uh, Arm triangle from the bottom, it didn't land, it didn't work, but the fact that he's going for it, like, that's not something that a lot of people have in their arsenal in modern day MMA, yet let alone back then. And then just super technical, man, going from submission to submission until he eventually find the one that works. And let's be real, like, leg locks in general, they've been super effective at this point in the UFC, just because those that know it, it seems like they have sort of an unfair advantage. But this heel hook was different. Like it wasn't a knee bar, which is the more common that we've seen it up to this point with Ken Shamrock, etc. No, like this was an outside reap heel hook, tugging on the Achilles and snapping that, snapping those arteries in that. I said arteries. Oh man. Oh man. Snapping those ligaments in the knee. Sorry about that. Get it together. Get it together. I need a sip of water after that one. Call in some ligaments, some arteries. Come on, man. Hey, we're not here for the medical advice. We're here for the fight talk. We're here for the fight talk. Whew. I needed that. But just a super impressive finish from Marco Huas. And our tournament semifinals are set. Our first matchup is Paul Varelans versus Mark Hall, the polar bear. Once again, 6'8", 300 pounds, coming up against the 6', 190-pound Mark Hall. Obviously, a huge size advantage for Paul Varelans that just stood out immediately. But he's not scared at all, man. And this one was great too. Varelans runs across, as he always does, straight to his opponent, and Mark Hall's just sort of standing there waiting. And I was surprised by that. with a big guy like that, you're either trying to circle out, you're not waiting to just meet him head on. But no, Mark Hall stood his ground, and as soon as he got in range, he literally jumped like a foot in the air and just throws a right hand that just cracks Paul Varelans. I was so surprised by that. Like, who does that? Like, no, nobody does that. It wasn't even a flying like a Superman punch, like where you're lunging forward. Like, no, my man's waited for him to come to him, jumped in the air, and just said, huh, and landed a nice right hand. I was super surprised by that. Um, but gets back to space, starts throwing some leg kicks, and I'm thinking, we got another Carl Worsham situation here. Like, if he stays on the outside, he could really do some damage to Varlance. I mean, he already did significant damage with that right hand. But in typical Paul Varlance fashion, Varlance pushes him up against the fence, ended up working some real good body shots, and ended up shifting his hips and landing a judo throw straight into scarf to hold. I'm like, he was watching that Remco Pardoel fight earlier. He took some pointers there. Got a nice hip throw for the second fight in a row. And from there, which I found hilarious, instead of trying to work for a technical submission, he starts going for a neck crank, just savage, just pulling. So Mark Hall's on the ground, obviously facing this way. Paul Varlans is in side control here, and he's just pulling his head up this way, like trying to like wrench his neck. And it's just strange because yeah, it hurts, but it's not like a submission. Like, it's not like you're trying to. I mean, I don't know. Maybe if you're strong enough, you could get somebody to tap with that. But just wrenching the neck, usually guys could just move out the way or reset their position, and then they're not really going to be affected by that any longer. But just funny. I found that hilarious that he just full on doing that fake neck crank that does absolutely nothing. But eventually worked his way into full mounts and started throwing some nasty downward elbows to the top of the head. And as soon as he landed two of them, you could see Mark Hall's plan changed immediately, and started trying to defend his head very, very hard. And as soon as he did that, uh, Paul Varlans just grabbed his arm and went straight for a key lock, which I found fascinating. Not many people would think to do that in that position, and it's a viable move. Don't get me wrong; it's very good striking into grappling awareness by Varlans as far as finding his shots, landing his shots, and then seeing you're trying to defend with your arms that way. Fine, I'll attack the submission, and ended up getting it done. So that was it was a short fight, but it was a fun one, man. Um, Paul Varlans ended up winning that one via key lock at 1 minute and 4 seconds. And let me mention this before I forget, because I already forgot. The heel hook by Marco Huas came in at 3 minutes and 23 seconds. So a little bit of a longer fight. Paul Varlans, both of his fights went basically a minute, a little bit over a minute. So the big guy's fresh coming into the finals. But our second semifinals bout is between Remco Pardoel and Marco Huas, both guys that I was honestly very impressed with. Even in UFC 2, I was impressed with Remco. So I was looking forward to this one a lot, obviously. The king of the streets, once again, I will scream that from the top of my lungs every time I get a chance this episode, because I just found it so hilarious hearing Michael Buffer. Like, it felt like it was all caps on the on the sheet, like the king of the streets. But Huas came out circling again, landing intercepting low kicks as Pardo's trying to close the distance. And I wrote here, I'm like, who gave this man a time machine? Like this man, in a lot of ways, is working with the modern MMA game. Like, he is allowing his opponent to advance into him and intercepting him with strikes coming in. Just very methodical, very technical game on the feet, which I super nerded out about. I'm like, this guy is ahead of his time for real. Pardo continues to close the distance eventually jumps onto a headlock up against the fence, has Huas wrapped up, and they end up stuck in this sort of standing guillotine position for a while, almost over a minute, where Remco's landing nasty knees to the groin, to the balls, to the jewels, while maintaining that headlock. And then the infamous, we gotta mention it. Marco Hua starts stomping on Remco's toes. The good old foot stomp. Shout out to Kamaru Usman. There was a time then. It's crazy that in this year, 2021, Kamaru Usman made this big turn to being this knockout puncher. When early on in his career, he was made fun of because he's like literally guys were like, "What are you gonna do? Stomp on my toes?" Because that's what he did in a lot of his fights. He'll end up putting guys against the fence and then start stomping on them toes. But that's exactly what Marco Huas was doing here. While he's wrapped up in the guillotine and just stomping on Remco's toes, which is hilarious. Commentators loved them, man. They were screaming them out like they were overhand rights. Like they're like, "Oh, another big foot stomp, another big foot stomp," which obviously shouldn't get that much respect, but it's worth mentioning that they exist. Um, Remco ended up wrapping Hua's leg in between his and getting a nice takedown, where he was trying to maintain the guillotine and end up in mount, but Huas did a very good job to end up in full guard. But it's really 3/4 guard because he had butterfly hooks. So he's really close to having his guard. But that butterfly hook is what's preventing both hooks from being in, obviously. And I just found it so fascinating that obviously he got taken down, but he works immediately for the butterfly hooks, which is good to keep your opponent elevated. And eventually he's hip escaped out of it entirely and reversed position, got right on top of Remco. And I found this so cool, man. Remco throws up his leg as if he's about to attack a triangle. So there's just levels to the ground game for both of these guys. And Huas is a beast on top, not in the way that he's landing dominant shots or anything like that. No, he just does a very good job at neutralizing all the threats. He never allowed Remco's left leg to come up to actually threaten the triangle. It was just the one leg. And as the one leg is up, he's grabbing the gi pants and controlling him really well, which is obviously, in my opinion, very underrated. Not easy to do, and not flashy. Let's be real. It's not something that the judges would see. Not that there was judges here, but something that the judges would see today and be like, "Oh, he's definitely winning the round because of that." But against a bigger guy, not easy to do. And who else is making it look easy? Just controlling in top position. And eventually he ends up um, in, going for that same. So once again, let me try to explain this. He already has the leg over his head. But he ends up, Huas that is, ends up grabbing that leg to end up in like a single leg position, even though they're already on the ground. And he wraps that leg up and drops back for a heel hook. The same, instead of outside this time, those inside. Which once again, you're showing that you know both of them. It's not just you went into that position and just said, let me pull on this leg. Like, you know that you could get the heel hook on the inside or the outside. Super technical. And these dudes are sitting in 50-50 in 1995, bro. 50-50 is such a common jiu-jitsu position now. Honestly, a lot of guys are so good at leg locks that they don't even try to take people down. They literally butt scoot as soon as the match starts and end up in this 50-50 position where basically your legs are entangled at your opponent and you're trying to make whatever adjustments you can to try to get that heel hook. Super cool to see these guys in this spot in for an extended period of time. Um, Eventually Remco is able to escape and completely avoid the heel hook, which good luck on you for that. But Huas jumps right back into his guard and lands a big left hand on the ground that sort of starts to open up Remco's guard. Once again, he's gripping those gi pants, and I gotta say it. Shout out to my jiu-jitsu guys. This dude Marco Huas does a freaking Toriando pass. To explain what that is, it's when you're standing above your opponent and they have their legs up, and you're holding onto the legs with the gi pants. You pull down on the push down on them so that their legs are sort of level with the ground, and then you're basically pulling yourself to the side. So you're entirely passing their legs by pushing down on them and getting right into side control. And that's what he did. I was super impressed by that. I'm like, this dude, they only talked about his Muay Thai credentials, but this dude clearly has been training jiu-jitsu for a long time. Like he knows what he's doing on the ground. Attacking submissions, attacking positions, advancing positions. Just super impressed by Marco Huas and his ability to just have all these modern aspects of grappling and striking as such an early UFC. Like I said, just I'm gonna be gushing about this guy all day. But after he ends up in side control, he stuffs his arm inside the gi, sort of behind Hemko's neck. And I've never really seen that. I guess to just use it as a good solid grip. And ended up just working his way to mount. And as soon as he got into mount, Hemko ended up tapping. So Marco Huas gets the victory at 12 minutes, 27 seconds. This has been the longest match so far, by far. This one was just super entertaining for me because, yeah, there's grappling, but it's not one-sided grappling. It's not that they're stuck in a position and trying to work to get out of it. No, this was all-terrain grappling. Really fun fight, and super impressed by both guys because even though Marco Huas came out on top, there was a lot of points where Remco was attacking and showed his mettle, showed that he wasn't lost out there. And just like that, we're here at our featured bout, almost headed to the finals as well. Now, this surprised me because once again, we're already deep into the event where one match is before the finals, and I look at the timer, and the timer says an hour has passed on the event, but we still got 50 minutes left. So I'm like, hold on. We got two fights that are 50 minutes. Like, we got 50 minutes left. There's two fights. So I'm like, we're in for some shit, and not in a good way. Not in a good way. So our featured bout, obviously, once again, we got Oleg Taktarov, the UFC 6 champion, representing Sambo, coming in at 6 foot 215, coming up against Ken Shamrock, who's fresh off winning that super fight against Dan Severn via guillotine at UFC 6, same event. Now they're both getting to fight each other. They listed him as 6 foot 215, but once again, I will say it again. Since UFC 6, this guy looks like he's 245. He does not look 215. He looks way bigger than Oleg, even when they're standing next to each other. The muscle mass just much larger than Oleg. So I'm like, these stats be a little bit a cap. I don't know. I don't know if they just kept using the same stats from the first time they measured them out. I don't know, but it's clear that there's some weight difference here that isn't being talked about. But both came out in orthodox in this fight. Ken is looking for jabs. Oleg is looking for inside leg kicks and landing them effectively. But eventually, Ken Shamrock sort of shoots for a takedown. And instead of resisting, Oleg just pulled guard. And as soon as I saw this, I'm like, oh, so this is how this one's going to go. Oleg is holding a tight full guard, sort of wrapping up the back of Shamrock's head, obviously in a stalling position. And I wrote, they ain't going anywhere. We're going to be here for a while. So Oleg landing pot shots to the back of Ken's head. Ken responds by landing some short headbutts. And eventually, both guys had a moment where they really flurried on the ground that opened up Oleg's guard because he got hit a couple good times. So they ended up in that butterfly 3/4 guard where Ken Shamrock is trying to move into half guard and get over one of those legs. But Oleg does a good job of maintaining full guard. And once Shamrock's in full guard, we saw this in his featured bout against Hoist Gracie. He's good at keeping himself safe. So he'll keep himself safe, stay in top position, and land punches, which in today's MMA could be good if you're scoring with judges. But back then, there's no judges, so you can't win on points. So you should be trying to go for an advance instead of sort of stalling. But I understand keeping yourself safe and out of danger for sure. So Shamrock ended up just repeatedly back in full guard. Oleg ends up starting to sort of, I found this funny. They ended up towards the fence, and Oleg is sort of holding the fence while looking at Ken. Obviously, he's under him and using the fence to sort of stay underneath him because he was trying to like move into half guard. So I found that pretty cool, you know, as a way to sort of save some energy from doing what is that called? Hip escapes. So instead of doing a hip escape, you're just pulling yourself with the cage, which I found pretty funny. The little savvy veteran move there by Oleg Taktarov. But Ken Shamrock, whenever he can, is trying to land that right hand over the top, but doesn't really have much daylight to do so. Every now and then he'll land a shot, and eventually he ends up cutting Oleg's left eye, which is the eye that he got cut in as well in UFC 5. So something to keep an eye out for moving forward. See what I did there? In any of his fights, because that's clearly a susceptible part of his skin at this point that could just reopen at any point. But keeps sort of working to damage that cut. And eventually Big John resets them at the 15-minute mark. So you see, I'm trying to save it for you guys. I'm trying to make it as entertaining as possible, but a lot of time is passing here. Shamrock ended up throwing a straight right on the feet that Oleg ducked under. So Shamrock sprawled, and Shamrock sprawl is heavy. Like you could tell that guy has some serious wrestling chops because Oleg's ducking in for a takedown and just getting like hammered by his sprawl. Like he's bouncing off his hips in a way. And Oleg ended up putting himself back against the fence and pulling guard again. And as soon as he pulled guard, I'm like, no, not again. But we're here again with obviously Shamrock in top position. He ended up going for the old school can opener, which is when you're holding your opponent's head and once again and doing that neck crank. So you're pulling their head up this way and pulling them towards you on top. I was surprised that Oleg ended up not going for an armbar there because that's the counter to that move, sort of attacking their arm because they're putting it right across your body. Which is what you need. You need the arm to be down your body in order to start attacking it for the armbar. And that's literally what they're doing. Since they're holding you like that from on top, both their arms are there to be armbarred. But Oleg never really went for it. And even when he did, as soon as he tried to attack for it, Ken Shamrock bailed on the position entirely and just ended up staying heavy on top again and landing short punches, yada, yada, yada. Eventually, at the 21-minute mark, they ended up getting reset again. And you see Shamrock has some swelling too now on his face. Oleg is really swolled up on both sides, but obviously he has the cut on that left eye. And you could see I wrote here Oleg is traumatized because Ken was throwing that right hand so much as a lead. He ended up feinting the right hand, not even throwing it, just feinting it, and then Oleg dived right in for a clinch. So I found that funny. He sort of knows what's coming at this point, and Ken is playing mind games with him to try to bait him. But Ken, that is, ended up grabbing the body lock and landing some nice left hooks to Oleg in the body, and then comes up top, lands a nice left hook up top, and separates from the clinch. I was really, really surprised by that. I'm like, yeah, you're having the success on the feet as well. Might as well take advantage. And those are some nice shots. I was like, maybe that's an avenue for success here for Shamrock if he continues to do it. But he didn't. Of course, Ken landed a few right hands, then found himself in the body lock again. Oleg ended up rolling through to try to attack for a knee bar, but Ken stuffed the leg immediately. And once again, we're in full guard with Taktarov on the bottom. Ken is putting all his weight on his hands. This is when I could tell Ken was getting a little frustrated with the groundwork. Instead of trying to attack the position entirely, he literally just put his hands right on Oleg's neck and standing over him and just trying to choke him like that, looking down on him. And obviously that isn't too effective of a move. If you're able to bridge out in any direction, there's no choke there anymore. And that's exactly what Oleg ended up doing. But once again, they ended up getting reset again, this time at the 27-minute mark. So once again, we got a 30-minute time period, a 3-minute overtime if it goes to 30 minutes. Just a reminder. And Ken Shamrock, as soon as they get back on the feet, is just lunging in with that right hand, but he's missing. Like he's missing over and over again. And eventually, the third time that he goes in, misses. Oleg counters with a nice slick right hook. I'm like, oh snap! Like Oleg knows what's coming, and now he's landing his own shots, which I was surprised by. It didn't do too much to Ken, but still. But Ken keeps going to Old Faithful, grabbing that body lock over and over again, and trying to land a left hook off of it. And he did it again. And I'm like, this is the second time now that it worked. Like, why not keep doing it? You go to the body lock, act like you're gonna get a takedown, separate, and land a big left hook. But that was the last time he ended up doing that. I was calling for it. I felt like a third coach out there. I'm like, dude, it's working. It's working. But Ken throws a leg kick, forgetting that he has shoes on, because you can't throw kicks if you have on shoes. And Big John just lets him have it, screaming at him. It's like, you can't do that. He was super mad. Um, good reminder though, once again, because I for a second when I heard him screaming, you can't do that, I didn't get it. But then I remembered, yeah, if you got shoes on, you can't kick. You can't kick at all. But they're on the feet again, and Oleg landed a nice left hook that pissed off Ken Shamrock. Shamrock, in response, just slapped him instead of trying to punch him. Just slapped him with a big right hand. And now we're going to overtime. So at our 30-minute mark, we got Ken bleeding a lot from his nose and mouth, while Oleg has that cut over his left eye. Both eyes are swollen for Oleg, though, at this point. And both guys got some time to refresh, drink some water, and now we're in the overtime period. So Ken threw some nice combinations for the first time in the fight, where he's right hand followed by a left hook, followed by another right hand, just literally doing work on the feet instead of trying to work under for a takedown. Oleg ended up clinching up, but ate a huge left hook from Ken. I would say that was the best shot of the fight on the feet in the overtime period. He really landed it flush, and you could tell it had Oleg thinking, as soon as that left hand is coming now, Oleg is ducking under it. And that's exactly what he did. He ducked under it, but once again, Ken's sprawl is just so strong. He'll sprawl, and then immediately Oleg would just pull guard. I'm just like, no, not again. Um, but yeah, made him pull guard, and right towards the end, like the last couple of seconds, Ken Shamrock ended up trying to set up a leg lock of his own, but it was too late. The bell rang. And once again, man, I'll say it once, I'll say it again. Well, I've said it once, I'll say it again. Ken Shamrock got robbed, man. He ends up getting the draw on his record in this one, but I think against Oleg and before against Hoist Gracie in both those fights, even though they went to the decision, well, the time period really, he won those fights. Like he was landing the more effective strikes, pushing the action on offense. You got to give him the decision in that one. But obviously, there's no decision. So it just considered a draw for both guys, which, in my opinion, just sucks. I can't wait till that is over with because then it'll feel like we watched something for a reason. Like once it hit like the 20-minute mark, it just felt like Oleg was doing whatever he could to hold on, which sucks to be honest. But we got through it. Feature bout is done, and now we're headed to the main event, the finals of the tournament. Paul Varelans versus the king of the streets, Marco Huas. Once again, Paul Varelans standing at a very tall 6'8", 300 pounds. And Marco Huas is 6'1", 210. As soon as the fight starts, once again, you already know what's happening. Paul's running right across to get his hands on Huas. But as soon as this happened, I knew, with all due respect to Paul Varelans, where this fight was heading. He's running in with both hands stretched out, trying to grab onto Huas. Huas leans back and lands a check left hook and circles away. Like, doesn't even try to follow up, just steps back, lands it, and then starts to walk off at that angle. And I'm like, this man is good. Like, this man is good on the feet. Like, he's not just out there throwing punches. Like, he lands a shot and circles out and gets people following him so that he could do all kinds of nice combinations, which is really cool, man. So after he landed that left hook, he has Paul still charging at him, and he starts throwing real strong leg kicks to the thigh. 3 in a row that landed in the same exact spot really hard. That really had me thinking, this is the game plan. Keep them moving, stay on your bike, keep them moving towards you, and just punish him for coming in. But once again, Varelans is relentless. He ends up barreling his way in, grabbing the body lock, and pushing Huas up against the fence. He starts landing some knees to the groin, cheeky knees to the groin, which I respect. You got to do what you got to do to stay in these fights. Eventually, they separated off the fence, and Huas landed some really nice leg kicks, and then starts retreating behind the jab. So landing the jab, and then stepping back off of it. I'm like, this dude is good, bro. Like, I I don't think there's anyone, like, I was thinking back about potential matchups. I don't think there's anyone who's not a straight grappler that could give him problems, because even like I could picture this guy beating Royce Gracie, because even in that matchup, he has the wherewithal in the grappling, but his striking is just on another level. And Don Wilson is agreeing with me on this too. He's like, this is the best striking I've seen all night, and I agree. Huas is on another level in that way. But once again, just moving back, walking Varelans onto leg kicks, trying to land that big left hook again, but he keeps sort of coming up short. And Varelans is tough, man. He's just coming forward, trying to put the pressure on him, and keeps forcing Huas to actually duck in for takedowns of his own. And eventually, as Huas ducked in for a takedown, Varelans grabbed the guillotine, and literally, you could tell this man is gorilla strong. This dude just lifted Huas up off his feet by his neck. Like, he has him in the guillotine and is literally hanging off the ground. That's how tall and strong this guy is, that he's able to lift him up off the ground by his neck. Crazy. But it wasn't enough to get the tap. Huas worked his way out of it and then sort of circled off the fence. And Varelans started landing some leg kicks of his own, which I really like, man. They always say that, just because you find a leg kicker doesn't mean you can't throw leg kicks. And literally it's like, oh, that shit works for you. Let's see if it works for me. And it was. Every time Varelans would throw that big leg of his, you could see it hurt Huas, and, it made him want to clinch. So I'm starting to think, that's the answer. You got to keep throwing those leg kicks. But Huas is landing some knees to the groin, followed by foot stomps in combination, which is hilarious. Just such weird striking, but it's effective, it works, and most importantly, it is annoying. So Huas takes Varlins back standing, but can't really do much with it because he's so much taller than him. Like he can't even get a hook in because he's 7 inches shorter than him. So he can't get his leg into the hip. So he's just hanging on his back. And at one point he tries to jump up to do so and just misses entirely. So it looked like a little kid trying to like climb up their sibling or something. It was really funny. But couldn't really get onto his back, but was holding onto it for a long time. Um, Varlin started landing some nice elbows where he's obviously being controlled from behind. So he's trying to throw him back here and land them however he can. Not really flush, but once again, annoying shots, shots that hurt, shots that you don't want landing on you, especially as you're working to get a takedown. But eventually, Hua starts. Oh yeah, sorry. Eventually, Big John separated them, and now we're back at distance. And this is not what Varlins wants at all, even though he was in a bad position anyway. Hua starts landing those leg kicks again, straight to the thigh, and Varlins is trying to answer with his own. But you see at one point, Huas lifts his shin to check the leg kick from Varlins, and you could see it hurt Varlins. Like as soon as he kicked Huas's shin, he didn't throw that kick again for the rest of the fight because that hurts, especially if you get it right at the right angle. You lift the leg up, it really hurts. And from the rest of the fight on, he wasn't throwing no more leg kicks, but every time Huas tries to throw a leg kick, he would pick the leg up. So I'm like, I love Varlins, man. He's a tough dude and adaptable. Like he's learning how to deal with these strikes during the fight because of what his opponent did to him effectively. Like that takes some grit. Like you got to be tough as hell where things aren't working for you, but you're still learning from your opponent on what you should do to them. Like that's a hell of a grit for sure. But Huas keeps circling off, landing that leg kick whenever he can. But Varlins is trying to check it. So the problem that I noticed though is that Varlins would lift the leg up, but he's not turning the foot in, which is what you need to do in order to really put that bladed part of the shin forward. Because if not, they're kicking your calf really, and that doesn't hurt them because it's a soft part of the leg. If you're able to get it up and sort of turn your foot in, that's when they start hitting that hard part of the shin at the front. But Varlins didn't know that or couldn't get that done in the moment, so Huas was able to just kick right through those checks. And eventually, after so many kicks to the same spot, Huas lands a really big one and drops Varlins with the leg kick, and followed up with some nasty shots to become the UFC champion, man, at 13 minutes, 17 seconds. This was a long fight, but it wasn't boring at all. It was action every second of it and just super technical, man. Marco Huas is a problem. I cannot think of somebody that will lose to him. Um, so I'm excited to see what they have going forward for him, whether it be maybe a potential um, feature bout against Ken Shamrock or another tournament. Who knows? But this guy is good and good in an all-rounded way. That's super scary. And once again, just ahead of his time. I haven't been this excited watching these events and covering it to see somebody have success because with Hoist, with Ken, with all these guys, don't get me wrong, it's not that I don't like watching them compete or I don't like their games. What they do is effective, you know, but at the same time, it's like no, it's not. No. I hope my audio hasn't been too bad. But after all this time, to see someone who has it all together on the striking and the grappling side, uh, it's just hard to find. And obviously, when I saw it, I was just super impressed, and it's super commendable. So you got to give it up to Marco Huas. Big respect. Looking forward to whatever the next event has in store for us. So quickly, let me go over my rewards, not rewards, awards for this event. Let me take a sip real quick and we'll get into it. So our fight of the night, we have Larry Curtin versus Marco Huas. I gave it to this one because I felt this one had the most competitive moments. While Paul Varelans did have some moments as well, I think this one was more competitive in the way that Larry was landing some big hands and also defending the submissions well and staying on top of things. So I gave that my fight of the night. This one, it was hard to pick one because there wasn't really one that stood out as far as a good back and forth fight. So I'm not gonna lie, this one's kind of a stretch. But performance of the night, Marco Huas versus Paul Varelans. I've already said enough. Just super impressive. On the feet, on the ground, grappling, mixing it all up. Just a very complete performance against someone who's much bigger than you. You got to respect that. Knockout of the night, I gave it to Paul Varelans over Gary Harris. Um, there wasn't a size disparity, but just a tenacity disparity for Paul Varelans there. He really put it on Gary Harris and just forced the tap at the end. I hate that my KO of the night had to be a submission technically because it's a submission to strikes, but still there wasn't a lot of straight up finishes in this one besides submissions. So once again, when it came down to the submissions for submission of the night, I had a pick of the litter. To be honest, there was a couple of different ones that I could have went with, but I got to give all the shine to Marco Huas. I once again have Marco Huas versus Larry Curtin in that spot. So it's two different awards: fight of the night and submission of the night. You gotta give credit where credit is due, man. And once again, I came away super impressed with Marco Huas in this one. But after all this time, it's a beautiful day. Thank you so much for listening. If you made it this far, once again, I just really appreciate you for tuning in and taking this journey with me, man, because I'm super excited to continue to learn about UFC history as well as really see how these fights develop, how these fights all come together. It's not simple, and these guys really make it easy. The narrative going into the next event, there's always something to think about. Who they're going to match with who. How will that fight look like with the way all these competitors have their own styles. It's just a lot to look forward to. So looking forward to the next one. If I'm not mistaken, the next one is not even a numbered event. I think it's 7.5 or something, the ultimate. So that should be cool. Looking to see what that one's about. If you're interested, please come follow me on Twitter. You could catch me at Negron MMA, as well as on Instagram at Chris Negron _ Please follow the brand. There's so much stuff coming out, whether it be sports, pop culture, music. We got everything for you guys. So check out OTS Media Co. on all social media platforms, and then OTS Media on YouTube. And you could get all the podcasts there in video form, as well as all the podcasts on any of the podcast forums that you use: Spotify, Stitcher, Apple Music, anything you need. We have our podcast live on those, so you could get us whatever way you're comfortable. So thank you so much again, you guys, for tuning in. I hope you have a good one, and looking forward to talking to you guys again next week. See ya.